And for our final chapter, The Wind and the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, retold by Ellen Miles. So you're going to go take your AR test today. You have to look for the one written by Ellen Miles, The Wind and the Willows. Chapter 11, The Return of the Hero. When it began to get dark, the four friends all met in the parlor. Finally, they were ready to go, and Badger said, "Follow me. Mole first, because I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last. And listen, Toady, don't chatter too much, or I'll send you back." Toad didn't want to be left out, so he stayed quiet. Badger led them along the river, then suddenly swung himself over the edge of the riverbank into a hole in the riverbank. Sorry, I read that funny. Badger led them along the river, then suddenly swung himself over the edge of the bank into a hole in the riverbank. Mole and Rat followed silently, swinging themselves into the hole. But when it was Toad's turn, of course, he slipped and fell in the water with a loud splash and a squeal. His friends hauled him out, but Badger was angry and told him that the next time he made a fool of himself, he would definitely be left behind. They were finally in the secret passage, and the expedition had really begun. It was cold and dark and damp and narrow, and poor Toad began to shiver, partly from fear and partly because he was so wet. But he did his best to keep up on the long trip through the tunnel, and finally Badger said, "We should be under the dining hall by now." Then they heard over their heads the sound of people shouting and cheering and stamping on the floor and hammering on tables. Toad was frightened, but Badger just said, "They certainly are having fun, those weasels." Oops, I'm reading and I wasn't looking where the book was. They went on until the noise seemed even closer. "Hooray! Hooray!" they heard, and the stamping of little feet on the glass, and the clinking of glasses as little fists pounded on the table. The stamping of little feet on the floor, and the clinking of glasses as little fists pounded on the table. "What a time they're having," said Badger. "Come on." They hurried along the passage until it ended, and they found themselves standing under the trap door that led up into the pantry. Badger said, "Now, boys, all together." The four of them put their shoulders to the trap door and heaved it back. They hoisted one another into the pantry. Now there was only a door between them and the dining hall. Then they heard the weasel making a funny speech. "I would like to say one more word about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad, good Toad, modest Toad, honest Toad." The rest of the weasels were laughing and laughing. "Let me at 'em," muttered Toad, grinding his teeth. "Hold on a minute," said Badger. "Get ready, all of you." "Let me sing you a little song," went on the weasel, "all about Toad." And he began to sing a mean song. Badger took a firm grip on the stick he carried, looked around at the others, and cried, "The time has come! Follow me!" He threw the door wide open. What a squealing and squeaking and a screeching filled the air! The terrified weasels dove under the tables and jumped out the windows. The ferrets ran for the fireplace and got jammed in the chimney. Tables and chairs were knocked over, and glass and china crashed on the floor. It was no wonder, for the four friends were a frightened sight. Mighty Badger, his whiskers bristling, his great stick whistling through the air. Mole, black and serious, holding up his stick and shouting his war cry, "A mole! A mole!" Rat, ready for a fight. Toad, swollen to twice his ordinary size, leaping into the air with Toad. Whoops! Right, there's another sound, onomatopoeia, huh? Whoop, whoop. We say it, but that's how you spell it. The whole thing ended quickly. Up and down the whole length of the hall walked the four friends, yelling and shouting and whacking with their sticks, and in 5 minutes the room was cleared, except for a few weasels they kept for prisoners. They did a great job there. They are the 4 friends. Badger told Mole to go check on the guards. Mole jumped out a window, and Badger told the other 2 to set a table and find some food. "We need dinner," he said. "Come on, Toad. We've got your house back for you, and you don't even offer us a sandwich." Toad wished Badger had noticed what a brave fighter he had been, but he didn't say anything. He just looked around and found some good food that hadn't been ruined in the fight. Just as they were sitting down to eat, Mole came back. "It's all over," he reported. "From what I can tell, when the Stoats heard the noise from the hall, they ran away." "Excellent animal," said Badger. "Now, there's just one more thing I want you to do, Mole. I want you to take those fellows on the floor there upstairs with you and have some bedrooms cleaned out and made really comfortable, clean sheets and all. Then you can come have supper. I'm very pleased with you, Mole." Mole picked up a stick, lined up his prisoners, and marched them upstairs. After a while he came back and said that every room was ready. Then he pulled his chair up to the table to eat. Toad put all his jealousy behind him and said, "Thank you, dear Mole, for all your trouble tonight, and especially for your cleverness this morning." They finished their supper happily and went to bed to rest on clean sheets, glad to have won back Toad Hall. At breakfast the next morning, Badger told Toad he really should have a dinner party to celebrate getting his house back. In fact, Badger told Toad he should write out the invitations that very day. "Now sit down at that table. Write invitations to all your friends, and if you stick with it, we'll get them out before lunchtime. I'll help you out by ordering all the food for the party." That was an AR question. Or invitations. Hint, hint. "What?" cried Toad. "What?" cried Toad. "Stay indoors and write a lot of stupid letters on a morning like this? I want to go around my property and make sure everything's all right and swagger about and enjoy myself. No, thank you. Wait a minute. Why, of course, dear Badger, it shall be done. I'll give up this morning in honor of our friendship." Badger looked at Toad very suspiciously, but Toad just smiled. And as soon as Badger left the room, Toad hurried to the table. He had thought of a wonderful idea while he was talking. He would write the invitations, and he would make sure to mention his leading part in the fight, and he would hint at his adventures, and on the inside of each invitation he would list a sort of program of entertainment for the evening, something like this: "Speech by Toad. There will be other speeches by Toad during the evening. Lecture by Toad. Contents: our prison system, the waterways of Old England, horse stealing, back to the land, a typical English squire. Song by Toad, composed by Toad himself. Other compositions by Toad will be sung in the course of the evening by the composer," right? They're composed by Toad. If someone writes a song, they're the composer. The idea made him very happy, and he worked very hard and got all the letters finished by noon. Just then a weasel showed up at the door, asking if there was anything he could do. Toad gave him the letters and told him to deliver them as fast as he could. When the other animals came back for lunch after a morning on the river, Mole looked at Toad, expecting him to be mad about having to work all morning, but instead Toad was so happy that Mole began to suspect something was up. Rat and Badger did too. As soon as lunch was over, Toad said he was heading off to the garden. He planned to work on some ideas for his speeches, but Rat grabbed his arm. Toad tried to get away, but Badger grabbed his other arm, and he knew they'd caught him. The 2 animals took him into a small room, shut the door, and put him into a chair. Then they both stood in front of him, while Toad sat glaring back at them. "Now, Toad," said Rat, "it's about this dinner. I'm sorry to have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly, once and for all, that there are going to be no speeches and no songs. Try to understand that we're not arguing with you, we're just telling you. Toad saw that he was trapped. They knew him too well. His dream was over. Couldn't I sing just one little song? He begged. No, not one little song, replied Rat firmly, though he felt terrible when he saw how disappointed Toad was. Today, you know, your songs are all boasting. It's for your own good. You know you have to turn over a new leaf sooner or later, and this seems like a perfect time to do it. Toad thought for a long time. Finally, he raised his head. You have won, my friends, he said sadly. You have won, my friends, he said sadly. It was a small thing that I asked, but you are right, and I am wrong. From now on, I will be a very different Toad. Oh, what a hard world! And wiping tears from his eyes, he left the room. Badger, said Rat, I feel terrible. What about you? Oh, I know, said Badger gloomily. But it had to be done. Toad has to live here. Do you want him to be laughed at forever by the stoats and weasels? Of course not, said Rat. And speaking of weasels, it's lucky we met that little weasel just as he was leaving with Toad's invitations. I read one or two, and they were just awful. I took them all, and Mole is writing some new ones. At last, it was almost time for the dinner. Toad was in his bedroom thinking. Soon he began to smile. Then he started giggling. Finally he got up, locked the door, pulled the curtains across the windows, took all the chairs in the room and put them in a circle, and stood in front of them. Then he bowed, coughed twice, and began to sing. He sang the most boastful song ever, all about his heroic homecoming. He sang loudly and happily, and when he was done, he sang it all over again. He gave a long, long sigh. Then he straightened his bow tie and went downstairs to meet his guests. All the animals cheered when he came in and crowded around to congratulate him. But Toad just smiled and said, it was nothing. Badger was the mastermind. Mole and Rat did all the work. I just helped a little. The animals were surprised that Toad was not boasting. They gave him even more attention, and Toad discovered that he liked that. Badger had ordered all the best food, and the dinner was a great success. There was a lot of talking and laughter, but Toad was very quiet. Some of the younger animals tried to make him sing a song or make a speech, but he wouldn't. Toad had really changed. From then on, the 4 animals led a peaceful life. Toad sent a pretty gold necklace to the warden's daughter with a nice letter. He also thanked the train engineer and even sent some money to the barge woman to pay for her horse. Sometimes, on long summer evenings, the friends would take a walk together in the wild wood. It was a safe place for them now. The mother weasels would tell their young ones, "Look, baby, there goes the great Mr. Toad, and that's the gallant Rat, a wonderful fighter, walking with him. And here comes the famous Mr. Mole you've heard so much about." And when their children were having temper tantrums, their mothers would tell them that the terrible Badger would get them if they didn't behave. Of course, Badger loved children, so it wasn't quite true, but it always worked. The end. Da-da-da. Here's a lot of other great old books that I was telling you guys, right? There's a lot of books that are old. Robinson Crusoe. If you've been to Disneyland, they have like the you go up in the tree and you see their house, right? The Crusoes. Gulliver's Stories, right? Gulliver's Travels. He was the giant. He got tied down. I think he's in a movie, The Night at the Museum. The Wizard of Oz. Oh, hopefully you know about the Wizard of Oz, right? A girl from Kansas whose house got taken up in a tornado. Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest. Another great story, right? Lots of times they show him like an animal, but Robin Hood, he stole from the rich and gave it to the poor. And Alice in Wonderland. Another story about a girl who she learned a little lesson when she fell asleep and had a little nap, and all of her adventures in Wonderland. So these are some great books. They're old books, but Scholastic does a good job of retelling them so that we can understand them and they're not old English words. Anyway, I hope you like it. Yay, go take your AR test.